Hey, what's up? Ryan here, host of the I Want to Work For You podcast, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to interview an amazing employer, hear the backstory of what it's like to work for them, and tell you exactly how to go about potentially applying for a job there. You're also going to hear a lot of little snippets of advice on how to think about applying, how to go about preparing for interviews, and much, much more. Remember to stick around to the end. I've got some really cool tools that you can go and get access to help you get a better job. Now, let's jump into this podcast. All right, welcome back to the I Want to Work For You podcast. Ryan here, and today we've got Kaylene from Envada. Super interesting company in the bioscience space. It's interesting. We'd range from like cities and counties to like hotels, and now we're in bioscience chatting today. So this is probably sure to be an interesting one. So thanks so much for taking some time with us this morning.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so why don't we start off? Like, give us the elevator pitch on Invada. Like, what is it that you guys are doing exactly?
Yeah. So Envada is such a cool, unique company. The short story is we're a biotech company in drug discovery. But specifically, we're looking at natural products as sources of medicine. And we have this sort of like old world, new world approach. So I heard someone say one time, like, a society or culture isn't going to do something for thousands of years if it doesn't work. So think about the cultures of India and China, using plants as medicine for thousands of years. So we pair that sort of old world approach with the new world, machine learning and AI to really augment and streamline that process of drug discovery within natural products.
Oh,
So
that's
that's sort of our elevator pitch. It's an amazing company, and yeah, we're doing some really, really cutting edge stuff within
and
drug
you've
discovery.
got location in Boulder, you've got a location in India. Are those the only two, or where else do you guys recruit from?
Yeah, so we're headquartered in Boulder, Colorado, and then also Hyderabad, India. And then sprinkled around the US, or sometimes we call it US plus, so Canada, Europe, US. Mostly we have remote workers and G&A functions. So, your finance teams, your HR teams, so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah, and was that always that way, or is that kind of a post-COVID thing where everybody's spread out, or?
I think we started in 2019, so it was right at the cusp of when COVID was
Oh,
starting.
wow.
And so it might have been that, that was sort of the genesis of being remote forward. But I do think that probably would have been a position we would have taken either way, because it's a little bit easier to find talent, especially if they don't have to be in the lab, sort of doing white coat work. A lot easier, and I think more beneficial for the talent pipeline to look kind of everywhere.
Oh, for sure. For sure, 100%. I mean, clearly it's a different way to manage people. I think that's probably, we like to say, our corporate America likes to talk about like employees staying on task and are they as productive and yada yada yada. But generally speaking, it's like, do our managers know how to manage people?
100%.
Do we have good metrics, and do our employees know what's expected and what success looks like? And
Yes.
honestly, we were hybrid and partially remote from the beginning. So like 20 years of like remote, and
Wow.
we're like 80, I think we were 300 employees and like 80% part-time, tons of moms. And so it was like everywhere. I mean, you had moms working at 4 a.m. before the kids got up and at midnight after they went to bed. And so from a management standpoint, that was the challenge. It wasn't really the individual employee.
Yeah.
It was 100% like, do you know how to manage this diverse team that work on different schedules, different time zones, and like really prioritize like, well, do we know when we need them together, and do we know when we can let them be, doing their thing?
Yeah. Ryan, you were an early adopter.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
I
think.
love to hear that. And I think that, you know, business evolves with the unique landscape and challenges of like modern day. And I think what worked, people said this is not a novel concept, but what got us here won't get us there if we do the same thing. And I don't think that companies should shy away from problem solving that issue. Like, um, can we figure out how, like, when folks should be online, and, when they can do work asynchronously, and, when we need to come together as a team physically versus, when you can actually do work remotely. And one of my pet peeves about this whole remote conversation is like, where's the data to support that it's not working? I think a lot of people have a visceral reaction to if you're not in the office, you're not being productive, or not necessarily visceral reaction, but that's sort of like the narrative. And we're really big in Invada on data. We'll chat about that in a little bit, but my pushback is always like, well, where's the data support that that person isn't productive? So anyway, bravo to you for being an early
Well, I
adopter.
think pre-COVID, it was a competitive advantage to compete against big tech companies. They
Mhm.
were consuming all the talent, and it was very hard as a startup, and you guys are still fairly startup kind of world. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to compete against these big giant companies with stability and benefits and pay levels and all that kind of stuff. And so for us, like work from home was our competitive advantage of like,
Yes.
hey, this is how we do that thing. And then clearly COVID forces it
Uh-huh.
and almost is I don't know that anybody is really measuring the data because I don't know that they want to. But
Right.
from an employee standpoint, I think a whole lot of people are like, wait a second, you can't say that I'm not as productive, if not more, than I was. Like I'm here in my she shed office in the backyard. And so I have like created my space and oh man, my alarm's going off. Created my space, but yet, I just literally walked out here from the kitchen 5 minutes ago, right? And so
Right.
I do think it was always gosh, I don't want to say laziness, but let's be honest, like a laziness thing of like we tend to stay along our path until something forces it. And in
Yes.
startup land, it was we can't acquire talent.
Hmm.
But in big corporate land, it was, oh, COVID, I guess we have to deal with this. I guess we're going to have to do it. And so you've been at Envada for like during COVID, basically, right?
Yeah, I've been here almost 3 years, and I consider myself an OG.
Right.
That's like candidates. I'm like, I'm an OG here, given
Right.
that we started 2019.
Right. Well, and startup are like the cycle times are so fast.
Oh yeah.
Like I've been, you think about it in months, not years.
Yeah.
You're like, oh man, 4 months from now is so long as a startup. Like that's eternity. Whereas like, years can pass in big corporate and
Yes.
things don't change. So Envita wise, so I super interesting from a bioscience, but yet natural medicine, trying to find that connection, right? Like
Yes.
I'm guessing that certainly is a huge differentiator in kind of what you're doing. How does that affect like your team and your talent? Like, because that's very different than say normal, more laboratory created type medicine, right?
Yeah. I think that is what has differentiated us, especially in the beginning with acquiring talent. And I think in startups, there's sort of like three phases of growth or acquiring talent. In the beginning is you're really relying on your network because you don't have the fancy benefits, or maybe even the pay range to compete with, to your point, some of the bigger, corporations. So it's your story, it's what you're doing that make people say yes and abandon again like the fancy benefits. So that's sort of the first stage. So you really have to tell your story, understand what you're doing, your mission. This is, I think, where values comes in. And then I think at the second stage, that's probably the most difficult time to recruit talent because you're kind of tapped out of your network. Maybe you're at like 100 employees, so you tapped out of your network. And again, you're still probably not going to compete with big corp on the benefits and the salary. And so that's when I think there's a really heavy lift on the talent side of telling the story and doing a lot of proactive, pipeline building and community outreach. And then you reach a point where, like at Invada, you win Forbes top 100 company, startups in America.
Right.
And, then the data and these accolades kind of speak for you. And then everyone goes, who weren't the early adopters in the beginning stages of a startup, I want to work for this company. You guys seem really cool. Like I saw this article or this award, or, now I have, friends that work for you. So that's, I think, the early life cycle of talent at Envada. And to your point, I think what we're doing, especially in the beginning with a company, so important. Um, that mission and the values and communicating that, as grassroots as possible. So that's encouraging your team to be part of talent acquisition. So posting online and telling their story and incentivizing referrals because that's kind of all you got in the beginning. And so
Yeah, no, that right there, like it's
yeah.
interesting for somebody who's listening to this, you may not see the correlation, and if you're in a tech company, we speak kind of the same lingo, which is this is like the product adoption life cycle that you're
Mhm.
literally describing, which is like, hey, we have this like early adopter phase where real hardcore people who want to be on the front edge will take massive risk to
Mhm.
buy a product or to join a company. And the better the employers get at saying, we're a product, like our culture, the experience of working for us is a product that we want to go out and sell. And it works exactly the same. I think, one of the biggest things that we've heard over the past, 10, 20 interviews is this like people don't understand how big of a decision it is to take a new job,
Yeah.
period. Regardless of the organization, it is a huge decision that's like even after you make it, you still have all this anxiety of like, I don't know anything about this company and like I don't even know where to park my car and like whose mug is that and is it okay for me to put my lunch here and like and I'm
Yeah.
not sure that working from home it doesn't make it better, it just makes it different.
Yes.
Of like this huge amount of like I just joined a brand new family with a bunch of people who've been around it for a long time and I'm this like outsider.
Yeah.
And so
New kid on the block.
yeah, and I think kind of what you described in the marketing world, we'll call it like social proof.
Mhm.
People generally, the majority of people don't like doing things that are not proven somehow, that aren't safe. And
Mhm.
safety doesn't have to be, we have 5,000 employees and we've been around for 20 years, but it definitely has to do with I know somebody, not just the company. I know somebody, an employee so how do you guys drive, say, like the employee referral side of things? Like, how do you use that in a way that brings you in talent, the see that social proof, especially in the earlier days?
So definitely, I think when it comes to social proof, we definitely leverage Glassdoor very early on, and encourage people during the early stages of the interview process to look at our Glassdoor. I think it's very easy when you've got really great Glassdoor reviews. Most companies are like, but we
Right.
have Glassdoor reviews, so we're like, there's the social proof. Check out Glassdoor. Another thing I recommend for candidates is to do their own backdoor references, like ping someone on, from LinkedIn, from Invada, and ask them, like, how was your experience outside the team, outside the hiring manager? But specifically, your question on referrals. So we do have an internal referral program at Invada. If you and it's two-prong. It's, you get rewarded for referrals and then you get rewarded for if you have a hire. And so there
Okay.
we get a certain amount of money actually for a fun experience. So we don't actually give cash dollars. It's like, hey, do something really fun and memorable and we'll pay for it like at an X
Oh,
amount, which is really unique. And so every time we post a role on our career site, we're also posting it internally. So we use Slack as our tech stack to communicate. And we're always posting that referral program, like, remember the referral program, remember the referral program. And I think beyond the monetary incentive, when you work for a rockstar culture, you want to spread the good news.
right.
So we've always had a really robust referral program. I think we've solidified it with, I guess, the financial incentive. But again, I think it goes back to what I said: strong values, strong mission. People want to talk about it. Like, to your point with product, you find a really great product, you're telling all your friends. You're like, found this amazing product, you got to try it, and no one's paying you for it, but you're just so enthusiastic. And so again, I think if you set yourself up for success in that way, you will get referrals. And I'll say, sidebar, if you're really, really doing it well, and we've had this at Invada, even folks that have interviewed and have not gotten the job will refer folks. And so we've actually had a couple hires from people who are like, hey, we had to part as friends, but I know a girl over here, I know a guy who'd be great for the role. And so I think that that is definitely a testament to strong values, strong culture, and just a great referral program.
Yeah, and I think great companies like the incentive is there because it's the right thing to do, but all the data says that's not the primary reason people refer,
Correct.
right? Like they refer because they want to help out the organization and like it actually is better for them when we have great candidates coming in. And like most people, once they get to an awesome place, want to bring along, their coworkers and people that they knew that's like, oh my gosh, this place is so much better than where we were at together. Yeah, you should check this out. So what's the unique thing about like the culture and core values at Envada? Like what is it? Because clearly you're a startup, or I guess now you're a little bit later stage, you're like 4 or 5 years in, you're kind of progressing through those like, hey, we're not just like figuring out what we're doing, we've nailed some things down. Like
Yeah.
what is it specifically that kind of jives your culture? Because clearly the plant medicine thing definitely is a uniqueness, right? In the pharmaceutical.
Cool. Yeah. Definitely what we're doing, the mission is really cool. And I think as we think about, what's going on with the climate and people being more mindful of their health, it does resonate. It's like very sexy mission, I would say, currently. But then when you think about the culture, and a lot of times when people talk about culture, they're like, ooh, like you want us to sound like you want us to talk like you. Um, Invada's culture is about values alignment. And I would say what makes us really unique is that we have a very high do say ratio, meaning a lot of times companies will create, mission statements and values and it's all about optics. And no one is actually doing what they say they're going to do. So as an example, one of our values is agency. So really like owning your piece of the business. Now, if a company has that as a value, but they're not actually doing it, then again, it just becomes optics. Like we feel warm and fuzzy and maybe you got the, mission or the values on your job description, but you walk in the door and you're like, that is not what's going on. So what makes Invada, I think, really special is that high do say ratio that's tied to values.
So
Another
where does that term come from? That's a cool term. I like it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually heard that from my boss, mentor and coach, Robert Buckley, who is our chief people officer. And we were chatting a little bit about how we always go back to values, especially when we're problem solving. We always go like high level, first principles thinking, and then work backwards from there. Like now, how do we solve the problem at a granular level? And I don't know what problem we were noodling on, but he had mentioned like high do say ratio. And I was like, that's it. That's the secret sauce. And so it stuck with me when I think about, especially culture, because companies do invest in like mission statements and values. And then again, candidates come in the door and they're like, that is not what's going on. And so it's like, well, what's missing? Because companies will say, we have our values. And you're like, you're not acting upon them. And that's it.
And I think that's what, and definitely post COVID, I do think people are more tuned to it right now. This like authenticity in action. Like, are you
Mhm.
authentic? Does it show up? And that's the hard thing. It's why people are so, I don't know, like burned out from marketing. Because they're like, hey, you say all this stuff, whether it's about a product or about a company or about a culture, but like, is that just bogus? Are you just selling me on this? And it can be very difficult. Again, going back to like employee referrals and the idea that you're like, go talk to people. That is a massive confident flex when
Hmm.
it comes to recruiting of like, don't take my word for it, go talk to somebody. Go
Yes.
talk to our team. Go look at these things that most employers would never say that out loud.
Yeah.
They're like, please don't. Please don't go check out. I mean, we haven't even looked at our Indeed scores. So why, please don't. We're not sure what's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to the do say ratio concept, especially for folks that are listening in Canada, it's like, how do I even think about, you know, discerning whether this culture is for me? I think during the interview process, looking for that high do say ratio. So if the hiring manager, their hiring team is saying, hey, we'll get back to you, at the end of the week, are they?
Right.
And if they're not, that's a signal to there's not a high do say ratio, which then I think is a signal, a potential signal on, maybe they won't also exercise or like you said, living out their values. So it's
Mhm.
those moments that you're actually the candidate is also doing their due diligence as well. And in Envada, we really try to implement that same philosophy at the early stages of the interview process along the whole employee life cycle.
Right. That's amazing. So benefits and perks, besides some of it, your non-science is all mostly work from home. Like how do you guys maintain kind of the team engagement and stuff when you have this kind of some on site, some in a different country, a whole lot like working from home? How do you maintain that?
That's a good question. I definitely think two reasons why employees will stay in general is recognition and career advancement or career growth.
Mhm.
So when it comes to recognition, this is definitely very embedded in our culture. Just as an example, one of the things that we do, we use a platform called Bonusly. Shout out to that platform. And that platform allows you to give recognition, shout someone out. We tie that recognition to a value. So as an example, I would say, Abigail, thank you so much for helping me out with whatever project, hashtag agency, which is one of our values. And then I'll deliver you some bonusy points, which translates to US dollars. And then that gets fed into a public Slack channel where everyone gets to see it and comment and use GIFs or GIFs. And so it becomes very visible. So that's like one aspect of how we think about how do we keep people engaged, whether you're on site or remote. Let's build a culture of recognition. And I think that the second prong is career advancement. And you don't really know what someone wants to do if you're not having weekly touch bases. So out with the old, let's do this like yearly review and talk about your performance and where you want to be, or maybe even bi-yearly. Let's actually do it once a week, sort of like in these short sprints, so that we have this like top down, bottom up approach to like chatting about career. Where do you want to be? What projects do you want to work on? And so there's opportunity for career advancement and career growth. And again, you don't have to be on site, and it doesn't impact you if you're remote. And then, of course, beyond that, we do have team on site. So teams will get together in the Boulder Lab, and they'll do like cool stuff together. So we do have those, but that isn't as scalable, especially if you're thinking about growing a remote forward company, as it is, I think, with the idea of like what keeps people in a job? What are the factors that lead to satisfaction and retention beyond your remote? And I think those two factors as an example, again, it doesn't matter whether you're on site or you're remote. If you're thoughtful about how to implement them, then I think you have a high likelihood of high retention.
Yeah, and I think you just touched on one thing that you could probably use as a candidate to vet out organizations, the one-on-one. Like you could probably ask, like, so how often do you guys have one-on-ones with your team? And like that, just right off the bat, should be a really good indicator because if you work for a great company, monthly is the minimum. It should be happening more often. And your follow-up for that is like, so what's that like? Is it just about my performance at doing my job, or are you actually talking about me as a human, and so like kind of what you said of this, like, managers need to talk to their team, but not just about, what they're doing that week, but like, how's everything going? How's life going? What do you like? What are you trying to do? Where are your goals? Those types of pieces. Clearly, as an employee, my manager isn't always going to have perfectly vested interest in my career path. If that path leads me outside of the manager or outside of the company, but it's a strong indicator if one-on-ones don't happen, if there's not this like commitment to, no, we are committed that our managers talk to our individuals, not just team groups and not just once a quarter, like a consistent drumbeat of we create a time where you can ask questions, a time where we can talk about how you're doing. It's probably significantly more important with remote, but it's
Yes.
surprisingly just as important on site because I think that the on site people forget that just because you saw somebody, that doesn't count. Just because you walk past them at the water cooler, that doesn't count as one-on-one because it wasn't deliberate, dedicated, focused time for that. And so, one thing to 100%, if you're talking to an employer, ask them about those one-on-ones, because I can tell you, it almost always you can separate good cultures and bad cultures by those one-on-ones. Just because it immediately says, no, 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 we are dedicated to talking to our individuals.
Yes, I
And
agree.
so,
You can also reverse engineer the two concepts for a candidate. Like you could ask, how do you recognize employees?
mhm.
How do you, what is career, like what are the opportunities for career advancement and growth? Like how do you even think about that? And then to your point, like how often are you connecting with your employees? Is it one-on-one, weekly? Is it monthly? Is it biannually? I can't believe that companies still do yearly reviews. I'm like, what are we doing? But anyway, but you can ask those questions, and that will be a signal, I think, to your point, like, is there, again, whether you're remote or whether you're on site, like, is this the company for me? Is
Yeah.
there opportunities to grow and be recognized?
And that's probably more important the more dynamic you are as an individual,
Hmm.
the more dynamic you want your career growth trajectory to be. In the
Yes.
same way, I mean, the benefit that we both have working in tech companies is generally this is dynamic, fairly like rapid growth. And when there's growth in a company, there's growth and opportunities for the employees. And that means that your career can grow exponentially faster. But once again, those one-on-ones are important so that you don't miss out on opportunities, so that like you're talking to your boss about what you want. Like I think you brought it up earlier, we're not always sure where they want to go. And
Hmm.
that part of like, well, I didn't think you'd be interested in XYZ opportunity gets fleshed out the more often you're having these kind of conversations, right?
Correct. Yes.
So perks and benefits wise, anything unique in that realm that kind of like you guys have worked on or that you've focused on?
I'll say the one kind of unique benefit that most potential candidates are go, whoa, that's interesting. I've never heard of that, is an adoption benefit. So we've thought about the idea of, there are different makeups of different families. And how often do you see a benefit like that? And so the benefit specifically is, if you are successful in the adoption process, we'll give you $15,000 towards that initiative. And
Amazing.
I think beyond someone interested in adopting, I think it sends a signal that we're thinking about, our benefits thoughtfully, and we're also thinking about how different families look. And
Right.
so, and even if a candidate's like, well, that's not really in the cards for me, but like, wow, that's really thoughtful. Um, and so, I think that would be a unique benefit. One thing I will say that Invada has taken a stance on, which I actually value and appreciate, is we're not necessarily competing with salary. And I think a lot of companies run the risk of the salary race, like my competitor is paying this person this much. And what we know from data is that salary, while important, is not the most important. Flexibility, work-life balance has to top the charts for almost every candidate as the most important. And I've heard this time and time again. I will take a pay cut if I have a little work-life balance. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that is one thing, and I think it, relates to what you were saying in the beginning about how your company was able to differentiate itself by providing an opportunity to work remotely, and Veda does the same. We're very thoughtful about remote work. Folks that are in white coats or in a lab, they've got to work on site. But if we can allow for remote work, we do. And I think that it provides that work-life balance, work-life harmony. It also is a great opportunity to, source talent that may not have either applied for that role because they weren't in that area, or especially like your moms, your caregivers, women specifically. It opens up that talent pool. So, that is probably one of the differentiators, I think, is that remote forward opportunity. And then, like a lot of tech companies, unlimited or flexible PTO, as we call it. We don't call it unlimited anymore because I'll get in trouble with legal, but flexible PTO. We have built a culture of people who have very high agency. So lots of flexibility, but also equates to a lot of responsibility. And so this idea of, flexible PTO works really, really well in Invada. So those are just a couple benefits I think that really stand out beyond the culture that folks are working in.
Yeah, and I think the salary thing is super interesting and something to listen for. So there's a difference between we can't compete on salary and we're not going to race to salary, and so we're going to figure out how we make this more rounded, how we
Mhm.
make this more holistic in that piece. And you'll hear those two stories and they sound pretty similar, but the one is this like, oh, I give up, we just can't compete, like this is terrible, blah, 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 blah. And the other one is like, hey, we see that there are way more important things than just your paycheck, and we're going to focus and figure out why is it our team likes working for us when they could have made more somewhere else. That
Mhm.
like figuring out and amplifying is again the difference between a great company and a, oh, we're just chasing everybody company. you
Yes.
you notice it when you get, great talent leadership that's looking at it going, no, 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 we've talked to our employees, and based on what our employees are saying, they really care about these things. Let's do more of that. We're
Yeah.
still investing, in our team, but just in very unique ways that we know they'll actually appreciate. Because when it's just money for money, while a new hire might get a bump there and be like, oh my gosh, I got this extra money, trust me, like the long-term effects of it are not what you hoped for. Like it
Correct.
just is. You want to see a company. I like the adoption benefit. I like some of those specific things, because what it really shows is this company thought through. There was most likely a story behind it. It
Hmm.
most like an adoption benefit is a good example. Most likely didn't come from, you going to some SHRM event. It most
Right.
likely came from, hey, we had this situation. Like for us, it was PTO sharing, like the ability for the team to get together and be like, hey, we want to give extra days of PTO to this person because their kid has cancer or they have
Mhm.
cancer or these specific things, that nobody would put that in place just randomly. There clearly was a motivator behind it. And
Yes.
if you identify those and go, oh, that's interesting, so why did you guys do that? You're going to realize really quick, oh, they care about their team. This came from a situation. They're
Yes.
trying to replicate it and say, no, we should put this into our DNA sequence of the company. This should
Yes.
be our theme. And so, yeah, I really do think, software companies tend to be more innovative, and they're more innovative culturally. But I do think there's still that like, ask those questions. Oh, that's an interesting benefit. Why do you guys have it?
Yes.
And
Correct.
you will hear, like, that's the easiest way to hear the passion they have for their team. Like
Hmm.
find those unique perks and ask them like, so why do you do that? That's different. That's interesting. Like, why is this, or some of your like culture pieces? Why is that, this kind of like agency such a big deal to you guys? Why does it matter? Because in the why questions, like if they have no answer, then you're like, oh, so you just borrowed this from a book. Cool.
Yeah, right. It becomes a yellow flag. You said something really powerful, and that is the power of candidates owning the interview process as well. And specifically, the culture pieces and the values. So beyond, what does the team makeup look like? But like to your point, like how did you come up with those values and why are they important? And can you tell me a little bit more about blah 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 blah?
Right.
Becomes super important. And I think you can have hiring managers and interview teams really fail at that. Again, a signal at they don't got it together, probably not the
Mhm.
company for you. Or you'll hear really passionate and enthusiastic responses that are authentic and correlate with real stories, like and how and this happened at the company. And that's how a candidate gets a signal if this is the right fit. So I think you're definitely onto something.
Yeah, I think it's, probably because for us, I mean, we're doing this podcast today for this exact reason. Like for me, to job seeker wise, like I'm a proponent of podcasting and research in the same way on the job seeker side of like the right time to ask these questions is before you're looking for a job. Like
Hmm.
just random when you know all these people that work at all these companies, like interview them as
Yes.
a job, like prior to job seeking, like hit them up and be like, hey, I'd like to learn about why you guys are so awesome. Could we hop on Zoom for 30 minutes? I just want to hear what it's like to work there. and I'm
Mhm.
going to, put on a podcast or publish it in LinkedIn or, whatever I'm going to do. But surprisingly enough, like, so I'm rolling around in a new Cybertruck. Some people from Belgium stopped me and took pictures of it yesterday at some gas station. I'm like, that more people ask me questions about that than about where I work. And yet,
Mhm.
where I work and what that experience is like is way more valuable to somebody of hey, that's a great way to network is not to ask for something, it's to
Mhm.
be curious. And
Yes.
especially in the tech world, like we need curiosity. We need people who want to know this stuff. It should be, and I would bet for a lot of tech leaders, a lack of curiosity. They may not always be able to put their finger on it, but they're like that. I don't know. That person's just not like a good fit for us. And the ones that are curious, that ask questions, that show that they're thinking, that show they've done some research and respond in a way that's like, oh, you're adding the answer I gave you to other knowledge, and
Mhm.
you're creating an opinion about it or whatever, like shows a methodical way of thinking and being curious and researching. That's what we look for at almost every tech company. Any innovative company is looking for this like constant curiosity.
Correct.
And as a candidate, the fact that you're not curious about where you're going to spend the majority of your waking hours is a red flag. Like,
It
oh,
is.
you just don't even care. You're just like, hey, tell me how much the pay is and what my PTO is. Cool.
Correct.
Yeah, like that's a big red flag for definitely the more mature talent companies.
Yes, I would definitely resonate with that and say that candidates coming in who aren't asking thoughtful questions, big red flag. Just like employers who don't ask candidates thoughtful questions, big red flag. And it goes both ways.
Yeah, this is a big freaking decision on both
It is.
sides. And surprisingly enough, we treat it like it's buying a coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just this very small thing that's like, no, you're like, we're committing to have you on our team. We're committing to give you access to this very important group of people in this very important environment that we're creating. And we're giving you access to that.
Yes.
We should be fairly thoughtful about that conversation, right?
Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
this is so awesome. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say also from the candidate's perspective, I mean, you spend more time with your, with your company, your boss, your colleagues, than you do your spouse, your partner, your kids. And it's, I think being in that environment, kind of like people say your spouse, the choice of your spouse really impacts, your life decisions. I think it's very similar in a corporate environment. Whether you grow, you learn, you are encouraged, you are celebrated, you are recognized, you are emboldened, all of the good things comes down to a really great work environment versus stressed, underappreciated, demotivated, you know, uh, higher PTO, more sick leave, disengage. This is a big conversation with employers. Disengage employees, quiet quitting,
Yeah.
all comes down to, I think, a really great seed, which is the candidate, and appropriate soil, which is the culture. And so it's, this kind of symbiotic relationship with, great culture and company, and then, the candidate obviously bringing in their skills, but it's got to match. And I think the interview process obviously is that vetting process,
Right.
and being really thoughtful, both parties being really thoughtful about that is important because, to your point, both company offering resources. I mean, it takes a lot out of a company to get a candidate, no matter their skill level, assume high skill level, get them to the point where they're producing. It takes a lot of time. To your point, they're like, where do I get coffee around here? Like, where do I park? Like, it takes a minute to ramp up. So it's a lot of investment from a company's perspective. And then again, where you work has impacts on your cycle, social, physiological health. And so huge decision, huge
Right.
decision. So definitely, I think the takeaway is be really thoughtful, both hiring manager and candidate, about that interview process and asking really thoughtful questions around what's important to you, hiring manager, and what's important to you, candidate.
Right. So how do you guys on ramp this talent? Like what things have you done or what is your approach, especially the remote? Like, how do you on-ramp them when, the next day they're still at home, but now they're working for a new company? Like, what is your approach to that?
We think about onboarding. Onboarding is not day one, it's months
Hmm.
um, of process. And so beyond the first day of being able to, go through the basic HR stuff, like did you fill out your I-9 and things like that, we spend a big chunk talking about culture and talking about our values. So it's continually reinforced in our job description. During the interview process, we have a actually culture interview that's just about values alignment on onboarding and throughout the whole onboarding process. I think another thing that makes Invada unique is having an Invada buddy, this concept that there's one person you can go to outside of your organization that can be helpful and like, where do I put in like a help desk ticket? Where are those coffee mugs? Or if you're remote, asking questions that you might not want to ask your boss or even a colleague. So that Invada buddy is someone that sort of lives with you through the whole employee life cycle, which is really, really, I think, valuable for a remote employee. There's someone I can go to Slack or Teams message that can be really helpful for me. And then another thing I think that's been really helpful is getting a pulse on how onboarding is working for new hires. So when a company's thinking about like how well are candidates doing, it's very arbitrary and subjective conversation unless you have some data to back up sort of what you're thinking about in terms of like how people are doing. So at Envada, we survey candidates. I think it's like 7 days out, 30 days out, 90 days out. And there's certain questions that we ask to get a signal on like how effective was your onboarding, or your hiring manager, were expectations set, things like that. And so we review those to make sure that what we're doing is effective. And so again, it's not just subjective, like we're doing all these things for our new employees to ramp them up and for them to be successful. Like, yeah, but is it working? And most companies will say, I don't know.
Huh?
So at Envada, we have some data to say, hey, this is what's working and this is what's not. And like a speedboat, let's pivot really quick. Let's not be the Titanic and take time, but let's pivot quickly to help support these new hires through that sort of, I guess, first really 90 days of getting ramped up within a new company.
Yeah, and that's like Abigail's like, yeah, you're speaking Ryan's language. Like that really is those two things, the actually the three, the mentor that's not your manager. I think we've heard that a couple times in the last few weeks. Like that matters. People feel dumb asking questions and they feel like they're bothering their manager to ask it. And clearly there's a ton of anxiety around, I don't want to sound stupid to my boss, but I
Mhm.
literally don't know where to log in for this one thing.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that one right there, this like, it's not your boss. It's not even somebody on your team, somebody that like you can ask those dumb questions to because they really aren't actually dumb. Like they just aren't. They're just you're brand new at this, right? And
Mhm.
the fact that especially somebody on the talent side owns 90 days, not just like, hey, we got all your stuff and you got a computer, your manager's going to take it from here. Um,
Mhm.
very much harms the like cultural integration. Yeah,
Mhm.
your manager can get you up to speed in your daily tasks, but the
Mhm.
why, like why we do those things and what the rest of the company is doing cannot be honestly like consumed and like internalized in 3 hours, fire hose. All right, now go.
Right. Yes, correct. And that's
Right?
why we can conceptualize onboarding as like day one. Day one is day one.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard it from
Onboarding
a
is a
client
long, long time.
I was coaching a management team yesterday, and they're like, "Well, we've told them." I'm like, "Did you tell them once? Was it right in the middle of change? You thought they would remember it all? They
Mhm.
actually hadn't had time to see it in practice. Like you are asking a human to go against everything that we've learned about how humans learn things. We
Mhm.
don't learn things all up front. We don't learn them without context. We don't
Right.
learn them without seeing them around us and being able to apply them. Like we don't learn that way. So congratulations that you think your humans are special, but they're still
Yeah.
just humans. They
Right.
don't they don't acquire knowledge and internalize it during the most anxious points of their life, which would be new hire and it would be corporate change.
Yes.
Those points are extremely stressful.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that your team doesn't remember it.
Right.
And also like this isn't school. You can't just give them an F. Like you're actually harming yourself. If your team doesn't remember it, then internalize that and be like, okay, how can we spread this out? How can we give them bite-sized chunks? How can we
Yes.
but and then that last part, like if you go to work for an organization that doesn't care about like 90 days, how did we do?
Hmm.
Like huge red flag. Like you're
Yes.
not measuring any of this stuff. It should on, and that's a great question. Like, how do you get employee feedback? How do you get new hire feedback? Like those questions will give you a huge amount of insight into, do we feel like if we recruit the right person, they should just figure it out? Or do
Hmm.
we believe that recruiting was the first step and now it's our job to kind of ingrain them and build them, or I like to use the word adopt, to like adopt them into our culture.
Yeah.
Adoption makes it sound more like, hey, welcome to the family now. Let's get you involved here, not like, oh yeah, you're here now. Great. Like your paycheck will come every 2 weeks. Like, let us know if you have a question.
Yeah. I would say too, for candidates that are listening, that would be a really good question. What does the first 90 days look like? Is it this like defensive approach where they got probationary
Oh
period,
yeah.
where you're like, best of luck? Or do you have, like an Invada buddy scenario?
Mhm.
Are you, getting a signal on employee, or new hire, getting insights on new hires. One thing that we've done as well is we've done these bite-sized trainings throughout that kind of first 90 days. Like, how do you communicate on Slack, which is a tech stack we use for communication, especially async, very important. Questions around values, or bite-sized training on leadership. So these little bite-sized trainings that get the cohort together again, like, hey, remember me? Like almost like class of last week. And so it's opportunity to network, to get the folks, new hires together, and they're getting these bite-sized training. So anyway, back to the candidates, like ask those questions. And if the hiring manager team is, very clear on response, green flag. If they're like, we kind of throw you some KPIs, best of luck, maybe reconsider that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that's an easy and like valid question. Candidates a lot of times are uncertain about asking questions during the interview process. And so if you ask too much that's like way out there, like your culture and what the environment's like, but this very specific is probably very telling. I like what you brought up. You're on probation, which just boggles my mind. But that is an old school technique of like, well, at 90 days, we'll decide if we still like you.
Hmm.
Or are you just apathetic? Like, yeah, no, like you're not on probation, but also like we really haven't thought through this whole first 3 months. Or are you like you guys are, like very methodical, like, no, 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 like it is our job to get you like to this point where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you're jiving with the team, where you have this immense amount of knowledge about how things go on, that instead of waiting for you to figure it out on your own for 2 years, like we're invested in getting all of the non like daily task things clear with you so that you're not like open. I like to call them, they're like tabs in your brain. So you don't have all these tabs that are open in your brain that are like, how does PTO work? And like, when can I ask for time off? And like, how do I like, why haven't I heard about my health benefits yet? And when will these things, like all of those tabs that are sitting open, really smart and progressive organizations understand that it's in the organization's best interest to close those tabs.
Yes.
Like it is in their best interest to do that. And you'll hear it really fast if you just ask, like, what does the 90 days look like? How are you going to, like, how do I learn about all the backstory of everything in this place, not just my job? And it
Yeah.
will quickly be able to throw them in those three buckets.
Yeah.
Like, you think it's all up to me and you're going to fire me if not,
Yeah.
or you just haven't really thought about it because you don't realize how important it is and why it's in your interest, or oh wow, you've got a mentor, you've got a buddy, and you've got systems, and you're not even taking for granted that I know Slack. You're
Right.
teaching me how I fit in and communicate with the team instead of just assuming I'll figure it out. And
Hmm.
that, I mean, if you're looking for an amazing place to work, like I can tell you just from the talent leadership, yeah, Invada is where it's at. Like that literally that 90-day piece, if you're crushing that, then clearly you crush what comes after.
Right. Yes.
Because normally onboarding is probably the most overlooked spot because we do a lot about interviewing and we do a lot about culture on the backside. But those new hires, we just they're just overlooked.
100%. I would also add, I think you mentioned something really important, which is like, when do you ask these questions if you're a candidate? Like, you don't want to be the candidate that's asking all these questions in the inception of an interview. But you also don't want to oversee those questions. And then you get into a situation where like, wow, I'm 90 days in and this was not clearly a fit. So I normally tell candidates at the beginning at the HR screen, I'm like, this is like a first date. We're just trying to figure out if there's enough chemistry, no pun intended, because we work in chemistry, just enough chemistry to figure out if this is just initial fit. And we want to go on what I call a second date. And so at the HR screen, that's an opportunity, I think, for candidates to ask just like some general questions. Like, when are you looking for, to hire? Are there folks in the pipeline? Like, kind of what stage are you in? Kind of the same questions that employees ask candidates, like, do you have any other interviews or offers on the table? Ask them the same question. We ask candidates, when can you start? Ask them the same question. So it's just getting like a preliminary fit. I actually would recommend chatting about salary early on. There's a whole reason why I recommend that, but I digress. And then I think at the hiring manager stage, that's when you ask those questions. And I would even recommend, once you get through the whole interview process, to even tap the hiring man on the shoulder and say, hey, can I ask for another 30 minutes of your time? I have these other kind of burning questions. And if the hiring manager is not really enthusiastic to take up that call, I would say that is a huge red flag. They should be so enthusiastic to take up that call to make sure that you're very clear if this is the right fit, because that has huge impact on their team. If you're not being insightful, to your point, you're not asking these insightful questions, you're genuinely curious, coming from a place of, I really want this to work, and I want to make the right decision. So I would also recommend that, even after the interview process, saying like, hey, can I just get 30 minutes of your time? I've got these questions and I want to know how you think. And the reason why I say hiring manager specific is the hiring manager is going to be the most important factor in your career at that role. So it's not the company that's going to decide, whether you get time off, or the company's going to decide if you get a promotion. It's not going to be your colleagues that decide, it's your manager. And so
Right.
making sure that you are really aligned with your manager, super, super important. And again, if they're not thinking like that, that's a big red flag.
I like the dating analogy. One of the ways to kind of hack this that I see almost nobody do. I mean, clearly, I believe you should know where you want to work in the future. You should be
Mhm.
thinking about this. Oh my gosh, I wish I could work for this type of company. Like, there is the ability to go like hang out with these types of people. Like, surprisingly, very few job seekers show up at SHRM luncheons where all the HR people are.
Mhm.
Surprisingly, very few show up at SHRM trade shows where HR people are up there speaking about on panels about culture and this type of stuff. Surprisingly, very few job seekers show up to biotech councils and tech council events. And like, yeah, we think about the Chamber of Commerce and it's like, oh, nobody would show up to that. But there's literally like industry chambers of commerce and professional chambers of commerce in the form of SHRM, and which is Society of Human Resource Managers. Like, that is a neutral territory, casual environment
Yes.
where you're not disrupting their workday, where you can ask and interview just random people about like these types of things that, surprisingly enough, again, showing that curiosity will create networking potential for the future. And yet, very few people show up. Even like HR job seekers don't show up at those events and say, hey, I'm just interviewing, different organizations about what it's like to work there and
Yes.
trying to gather so that I know where I go in 3 or 5 or 10 years. those events are like $25 and they feed you lunch.
Yeah.
And is kind of like the speed dating opportunity in that space of like, again, it's casual, it's equal turf. I'm not asking for your time during the workday. I'm asking for your
Yes.
time when you deliberately dedicated to get away from work.
Yes.
Trade shows. Oh my gosh, like go interview people that are working the trade show booth at the company that you want to work for. They're
Mhm.
there kind of selling. They're doing their job. And so
Yeah.
I think that like that idea that it has to happen in this very kind of formal process,
Mhm.
and in actuality, there's a lot of informal situations where you could come up and ask these types of questions. That would, from a curiosity standpoint, from a networking standpoint, from a like understanding what's going on and comparing and contrasting, deeply underutilized by job seekers.
100%. Most job seekers are very reactive. They get let go and now they're on the job market. And so you're going to like differentiate yourself completely by being that one candidate who's proactive, like huge brownie points. And you're going to show that you're actually really interested in that company, genuinely interested.
Mhm.
And I can think about some of our recent hires who were hired in that same capacity, whether it was like a lunch and learn or a conference. And they were just like, I'm really interested in Veda. I don't know what type of roles you have in the future, but I'm super interested. And when a role became available, we remembered that enthusiasm. It was like, that thing is what we want. Maybe even if they don't have the exact skill set, like we can upskill them. But like that excitement about a mission in a company is just like amazing. And it leads to high retention, high productivity, all these different things. So I completely agree with you. I think differentiating yourself and being proactive in the hiring and interview process by showing up, people are going to remember you. And maybe even create a role for you just based off of like your enthusiasm.
Well, excellent. Well, thanks so much for your time, Kaylene. This was amazing. Envada's got an amazing careers area. If you go to their website, click on careers. I was looking at it this morning. We'll make sure to put some links in the description section so they can find you and your jobs. I know you got a couple that you're hiring for right now, but thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Abigail.
So that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of our podcast. So I told you if you stuck around to the end, I would give you some ideas of what we're all about and how I can help you. So number one, if you want to get job alerts from Refer, go over to Refer.io, refer.io, and sign up for job alerts. You'll receive our newsletter, you'll receive job alerts, career advice, job seeker advice, etc. Number two, we've got some really cool AI tools over there. In fact, an entire studio of AI tools built just for job seekers to help you identify your career path, brainstorm what your options are, figure out how to set up job alerts, rewrite your resume, prepare for interviews, everything, all the way up to the point of helping you actually build your own mentors to help mentor you as a new hire at your new job. So go check out our AI tools. Trust me, you will love them. And along with those tools comes access to our coaching community where we actually coach you on how to get a better job, how to improve your chances of getting a job, how to do better at your job, and everything in between. Now, lastly, if you're an employer and you say, hey, we're a great place to work, but we don't get enough applicants, our employees love working for us, but for whatever reason, we don't get that many qualified people. They're not that excited. Most likely, you just are not very good at communicating why you're a great place to work out into the world via your job ads, via job boards. You may not be that great at getting your employees to amplify that message out there. And we're here to help. So if you want some help, if you want to be on our podcast, I would love to interview you. I'd love to show you what I would do if I was you to amplify your employer brand out there into the job seeker market. So shoot me an email, ryank@refer.io. You'll see it on the screen, and we'd love to chat. Otherwise, we'll catch you next time.